Hello, and welcome to Chapter 16 on African art. This chapter in our text covers only what should be considered the traditional arts of sub-Saharan Africa. In other words, not Northern Africa, Morocco, Libya, Algeria, Tunisia, Egypt. Remember, we already spent an entire chapter on Egypt. It is also just a small sampling of art and style of a very diverse continent. Dr. Lisa Homan teaches several courses in African art should you want to go deeper. Let's see what we've got here. Oops. So let's look at our map. Here's our map. As we saw in Guns, Germs, and Steel, the Sahara was not always a desert. Its desiccation coincided with the rise of the Egyptian civilization on the Nile. That was Module 3. Farmers left the desert areas, which were in here, where the Sahara now is, and moved either north into Egypt or south. So I'm going to show the map several times during the slideshow, and as we move around the continent, I'm going to put a little red circle showing you exactly where we're going. So this is our first stop, and you can see it's in present-day Nigeria. I think that will be a quiz question. I will ask you what present-day country these cultures were in, and the answer is Nigeria. So the Nok culture in Western Sudan produced iron technology, refined ore, and terracotta. This head shown here originally formed a complete figure. Its D-shaped eyes are characteristic of the Nok style. The context for which it was intended is unknown. So here's the head, and you can see down at the bottom that it looks like it's kind of torn or it's been broken. The body's been broken on it. So that's what is meant by that it was originally part of an entire figure. And this is now all that's left. So look at this. You have no difficulty recognizing that it's human, but it's highly stylized. So there's very little interest here in making this human head look naturalistic or look like a real human. The Nok culture was agricultural. So that means that they were all farmers. This is from Rafin Kura in Nigeria, terracotta. It's 1 foot 23 and 16 inches high, so it's pretty big. This was part of a larger figure, as I said. So it's also thought that some of these ornaments on the head may have had feathers or other things added to it originally. So the D-shaped eyes here, you can see there's no attempt to make them look real. They look very bulbous, and they just sort of almost stuck their finger in to make the pupil. But the mouth is open. So I don't know, it's very curious. I also noticed things like the eyebrows up there are just a little squiggle of clay put on it. And by the way, when it says terracotta, I know I've told you this before, but there are many different terms for clay. And terracotta is one of them. Ceramics, porcelain, stoneware, there's various terms. So it's just basically clay. But terracotta has been fired in a kiln, so it's very hard. And this is one from the Mint Museum. Oh, I'm sorry that my caption there is so dark, but this is just a little taste of what you could see if you were able to visit the museum now. But when I saw it there, I thought, oh my gosh, it's a head just like the one in the textbook, or very similar to it. So there it is at the Mint on Randolph, not the Mint downtown. So moving on, we're in the same general vicinity as Nok culture, but slightly later. And this is Ife in Benin. Ife is the sacred site for the Yoruba people and was probably the artistic parent for the city-state of Benin near Nigeria. Memorial heads were commissioned by the fourth king, or Oba, who decided to start a tradition of memorial sculpture that remains to this day via the ancestors' descendants. So this is our map showing us where we are. You can see how very close it is to Nok, and back right up there, sort of under the red circle, is the word Nok. So we've been there. This is where heads are made. And now you can see an entirely different style of head. This is a crowned head of a ruler from Ife. Yoruba culture, 12th to 15th century. So Yoruba artists created naturalistic yet idealized portraits of the leaders in the city of Ife. Memorial heads were commissioned by the fourth king, as I just said, to start a tradition of memorial sculptures. It was they were done in a process known as lost wax, and there's a slide coming up where I will show you what lost wax means. And the technology of lost wax bronze casting is indigenous to this culture. This is an important point that I want to make because the history of looking at the art of Africa is loaded with very racist perspectives on it. And so one of the main ideas of this lesson is for you to see with your own eyes the very art styles and the things that were made by the indigenous African people without any assistance from the colonizers. So here's another one of these heads. So now, I didn't talk about it much, but I think these are incredibly beautiful. I'm going to talk about the technique in a little bit. This ruler here has a crown on his head. I know I think he looks very feminine, but it's supposed to be the king. And there's a lot of these parallel lines scored down the face. These represent scarification, which was a way that the Yoruba people thought it made them more attractive, was to cut their faces, and then the scar tissue would form these designs. And here's another one very similar. This one is missing its crown, but you can see the little holes punctured in the head where the crown would be applied. So compared to the knock head, it's far more naturalistic. You get much more subtle modeling of the form of the head and the eyes and the lips and the nose. Everything is much more naturalistic, but still it's not completely naturalistic. Look at the eyes, for example, and you can see they've been rather simplified, and the eye socket is not terribly deep. But you do get an upper and lower eyelid, and you get an eyeball represented in there. So that's very interesting. Now here's the diagram of the process of lost wax. So remember, this is what they figured out. They learned it actually from other Africans, but it was something that they took hold of and still use to this day. So it starts off with a clay plug like this, just sort of a blank. And then on this piece of clay, wax is put, and I'm sure this is like beeswax or some kind of wax. And so the sculpture is created in wax exactly as you want the end product to be, the bronze product. So wax is really malleable. You can subtract it, you can cut it out, you can add to it, and you can use a heated instrument and smooth it out. So it's very, very flexible. And you can continue doing that until it's exactly as you want it. Then you stop, and you put a base on it with these little tubes. Well, I mean, they're not tubes. They're just solid pieces of clay. They're called sprues. And then when that's done, you encase the entire thing in clay again. So now it's very solid. You have clay in the middle, then wax, and then more clay on the outside. Then you take this glob and you put it in an oven and heat it, and the wax melts out. And so it leaves a hole in the clay that's exactly the shape you want your figure to be. Then you take molten bronze, and this is, again, a very complicated metal craft technique. You melt it and then pour it into the mold, and it will take the place, go every place where there was wax. And then you let that cool, and when it's cool, you break apart the clay mold on the inside and the outside, and you have the nice bronze head. So that's the technique. Now I'm going to show you some more because, like I said, it's a very popular art in this area. And so I've got a variety of pieces to show you. Some of these are bonus features, so just kind of, enjoy. This is an entire figure showing the head of the Oba and a body, but you can see that they're out of scale. So look at the idealized naturalism. So it does look rather real. The head does. And notice that the disproportionately large head, which they believed was the seat of wisdom. So making a figure's head too big for its body was saying, oh my God, this guy was so smart. So that's the king, and the crown on his head was like the crown I showed you earlier. Here's one that I found that I really like because it, as far as we know, it is not a king. It is a seated man, and I don't know what the purpose of him was, but he was made out of copper, and he's 1 foot 9 1/8 inches high. He's also been damaged, but I see so much attention to detail and beauty, even in his pose, like where it's so asymmetrical. The right arm has been coming across his body to do something. His right knee is up, but his left knee is down, and just very sensitive modeling of the face. He's had a little bit of a dent in his forehead. So sometimes when cultures are at war and one victor, like of the winning army, might come in, they might do things like destroy the art of the person they just vanquished, or the culture they just vanquished. So that could be what's going on here and why he lost his arms. I don't have any idea. Now, slightly later, look, the date of this one is 16th century, and it's basically the same culture. This is the memorial head of an Oba, or a king, from Benin. And it looks quite different. The headdress is completely different. I don't think this is a crown, but I really couldn't say. And I also noticed that the modeling of the face has been very much changed. Like, look at the eyes, for example. There's, instead of carefully modeling the upper and lower eyelid, this artist has just simply put a little squiggle of wax. You have to think, it was originally wax for an upper lid, and another squiggle, another line for the lower lid. And then took a lot of attention weaving this headdress out of little strips of wax and these long strings of beads going down the side, but a very, very small ear there. Anyway, that's a 16th century head, also from Benin culture. So the Benin kings also commissioned works in ivory, and I'm going to show you a hip pendant representing an Ioba, the Oba's mother, and it shows Idia, the mother of Esigie. So this is the hip pendant. I think there's a quiz question about this because I find it very interesting that the king wears his mother's head around his hip somewhere. So it's carved out of ivory, a completely different process. Ivory is entirely subtractive, meaning once you carve off something from the ivory and you change your mind or you made a mistake, you can't put anything back. So it's completely subtractive. So there's a lot of things going on here. There's this coronet or this crown across the top and a necklace. And the slide just before wants you to notice all these little figures in the crown and the necklace, that they alternate between a Portuguese man, because now this is late enough that there is contact with Europeans, and they're kind of fascinated by them. I don't think they've realized the danger that is in their future with the colonists. But we've got a little Portuguese man, got a beard maybe, and then it alternates with a mudfish, which is very, very hard to read. So mudfish and Portuguese men, and then her necklace is entirely little Portuguese men. She's got scars on her forehead and then two big iron strips that are right up there over her eyebrows, and then scars from cutting here. She's also got a neatly trimmed hairdo with very tight little curls represented in the ivory. Something was inset in her eyes to make her look real. I think she's got a very striking appearance. But there she is, and we'll see that again. Because here's another queen mother or another mother of a king, and very similar to a head I showed you earlier with that those woven wax strips on it. This one goes way up into a very high peak, but like the the ivory one we just saw, this head has 2 inset strips of iron there and some scarification on either side of that. A different kind of eye molding that both has nice formed eyelids, but also a little line to indicate the edge of the eyelid, and then strings of beads down her cheek. But very beautiful. So that's it for our incredible heads from this area, from Nigeria. But I just showed you a small sampling, and you know that they're gorgeous. So we're going to move now to another area. We're going to go to Mali and look at this settlement called Djenné. Djenné, it contained hundreds of terracotta figures dating from 1200 to 1500 CE. I'm just going to show you one, and it won't be on the quiz, but I just find him kind of fascinating. And then we will look at a mosque, and down here is the statement about the mosque. Koikonboro, 26th king of Djenné, converted to Islam in the 16th century, and he commissioned mosques for the city. So this is where we are. This is where all the heads were, down here in Nigeria, and now we're up in West Africa in Mali, and you'll see the geography looks quite different when we get there. So this is our terracotta man on horseback, or horseman. I don't know his story. I just think he is so cool because there's so much detail here, and yet he's very stylized. He's also really large. He's 27, almost 28 inches tall. When he was discovered, he was way out of his original context, so nobody knows the purpose these guys were made for, although there's probably some theorizing about it. Anyway, you can see the horse doesn't really look proportioned like a horse, but he's got a lot of really cool details, like a nice bridle, and the rider also is very stylized with a very interesting helmet on. So that's our horseman from Mali, from Djenné. So we're going to look at the mosque now. The Great Friday Mosque replaced 2 earlier versions on the ancient site. A central tower contained the mihrab. The finials of each of the 3 towers bear ostrich eggs, symbols of fertility and purity. So there it is. It's one of the most remarkable sites. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it's completely unique and as an architectural form, this indigenous style. I mean, if you look at it, you could actually use this for a film, like citing a culture in another planet, like some space, some science fiction film. But it's right there in Mali. So the film, one of the film clips is about this site, and I do want you to watch it because it explains the role of this in the culture and how it was renewed and repaired fairly recently. It's a good show. And I will ask you on the quiz what the purpose of the building was. So remember, it is a mosque. These are the 3 towers that have ostrich eggs on them. They will show up in the film. I'm not sure if anybody mentions them. I think there might be one mention in the film about the ostrich eggs, but there's also a question about those. So this is a link to the film, but I think you have to be in PowerPoint for that link to work. So that's why I posted the links on campus for you. So art in its context, the myth of primitive art. The term means early, but it was used to imply that civilizations were crude, simple, and backward. Pejorative use was rooted in racism and colonialism. Misconceptions about African artists being craft workers bound to one style are being unraveled today. And that means that it's a very hot area for research, African art. The city of Great Zimbabwe funneled gold, ivory, and exotic skins to coastal trading towns. Stone structures built without mortar by the ancestors of present-day Shona people are enclosed by tall walls. The conical tower resembles a granary. wood sculpture from this time have decayed. So all we have to see is what has survived, and that's just what is made of stone. So here's the area. Now we're going way down into South Africa to Zimbabwe and look at the Great Zimbabwe. So here's a couple of shots of it. So this is what remains, a great enclosure here. And an aerial view of the same site here. The film on this is really interesting. It's an animated film, but it talks about the original site and what the civilization was like there, and then also how more modern archaeologists and historians have treated this site. So pretty interesting, I'd say. This is a drawing of the great enclosure without any broken walls, and these are the conical towers that survive. And there's one of the conical towers, pretty tall still there. A lot of discussion about the purpose of them. That's why that slide just said it resembles a granary, which would be a storage space for grains, but nobody really knows. And there's the link for the TED Talk on the Great Zimbabwe. And to the right, so if you see the film, they will talk about these monoliths, these stones that are carved that represent the kings of the Great Zimbabwe, and how they're kind of like their coat of arms in sort of this culture, that this represented a specific king, and his queen was represented by this crocodile on the front climbing up, but this bird that has extremely large arms, talons here. This represents the king. He'll talk about it. You'll see it. So this is the end of the first part, and I'm going to stop now, and then I'll continue with part 2 of chapter 16 in a minute. So don't forget to watch your film clips.